The Minnesota Twins enter the trade deadline with an opportunity to still catch up to the Cleveland Guardians and also with the Royals breathing down their neck. The Royals add some great guys, the Guardians add some great guys, and the Minnesota Twins got, okay, let's see here. Trevor Richards. Hello to the pessimistic, optimistic, and everyone in between. Mostly the pessimistic here this evening. My name is Connor Philippi, and welcome back to the Minnesotan Sports Podcast. And yes, you read that right. The Minnesota Twins, with a prime opportunity to still jump ahead of the Cleveland Guardians going into tonight, where we once again put up a clunker offensively against the Mets. We are now 6.5 behind them, but we went into this trade deadline 4.5 behind them a couple days ago. The Royals are also breathing down our necks, and they make their moves. The Twins had all the opportunities in the world with so much minor league trade capital, and we didn't do a single thing besides acquiring Trevor Richards. Let's start with a little bit of a rant, and then we can go into what's next here for the Minnesota Twins to finish off this regular season and hopefully still make some sort of a push for the postseason, because there are still some teams that are also in that wild card race that didn't make very many moves as well. So we still do have a chance. But we'll go over this here. It's just all kinds of frustration with the poll ads. I mean, the front office couldn't have done anything with the financial tightening that has just been taking place over the last few years. The Twins ended up only acquiring Trevor Richards, who has a 4.64 ERA and 45 appearances here this season. Now, he did have a better ERA before his last few, outings. I think he had closer to a 3 ERA before the beginning of July. But even so, we do not need a relief right-handed pitcher. We went into this trade deadline. We talked about it just about a week ago when I had my podcast episode with Jake, where we talked about how right-handed pitching is honestly really good. We have our closer, we have our next up guy, and we have a good couple of great options like Alcala. That combination of Duran, Stewart, and Alcala are good. But the problem was our left-handed relief pitching. We had Cody Funderburk and Steven Okert as our best two left-handed pitchers. Even if Funderburk wasn't hurt, that is not good. And that was the issue we needed to shore up. So even if Trevor Richards had some promise, which it's going to be a long shot for him to get up to that point again, even if he does, achieve what we were hoping he would, we don't need him in this bullpen. We have too many good right-handed options already. And so the one addition we made wasn't even, an addition that was necessary. And it's just another circumstance where the poll ads said, well, we did something. That's the only reason they made this trade, was that they could say we did something under the sun, because before that, the Twins were legitimately the only team in the entire league that didn't make a trade, and they just didn't want to have that stat on their record, and that was quite literally the only reason why they made this trade. We also went into this trade deadline wanting some depth for starting pitching. We literally went into Tuesday. We went into this right before the trade deadline after Simeon Woods Richardson had the worst performance of his entire season and showed all the reasons why we should have gone after depth in the starting rotation, which was the fact that Simeon Woods Richardson is a rookie, he's very young, and there are a lot of reasons to be concerned about him pitching in the playoffs. And he showed that under the lights in New York in a big city type situation against a very hot team, and he put up an absolute clunker. If that didn't light a fire under this front office and the poll ads to make a move, it's clear that they never wanted to make a move in the first place. Correa was very outspoken about this, which is the thing that is the most frustrating and honestly the most concerning for Correa's future here with this franchise. He went out and he said to the media, this trade deadline, we need pitching. We need some sort of defensive help, And now, obviously, putting up a absolute goose egg the very next day or the night following the trade deadline is also not great, and the Twins need to work on that. But he was right. The issue was that we need more depth in our pitching. We need a couple more solid options in our bullpen. And he went out there, he put himself out there, and he made a direct message to our front office to make this decision. And they straight up did not care. And that's going to be potentially a reason in the next couple of years why Correa might request a trade. And that's not crazy to assume that that might happen in the next couple seasons. Maybe even after this season, if he gets frustrated enough and if the Twins end up not making the playoffs. Correa has been known to do this, to be outspoken about these things. And I'm sure he was very frustrated by the lack of doing anything here this evening. The poll ads, it's clear at this point. They only care about filling seats. They only care about selling jerseys. In their mind, they have Lewis, they have Correa. Those guys are going to keep people coming to the stadium, and that's all the reason they need to not make any moves, to not make any acquisitions next offseason most likely, and to not do anything here at this trade deadline. We joked about the fact that Kepler's only on this team because the girls like him and that they are selling Kepler jerseys to all these girls that think he's cute. We made that joke, and Jake made that joke about a week ago on the podcast. That genuinely isn't a joke. I genuinely think that's the reason why he's on this team after his absolute inability to do anything in the playoffs. That sells jerseys, that puts people in seats, and that's why the poll ads did it. That's the only reason they do anything. And so this is a direct message to the poll ads. I do not like you. And it sucks because Twins fans are going to continue to go to games. And I don't put that on them at all. I'm not frustrated about that. I'm still going to go to games because, everyone's talking about we need to boycott, we need to to yell at the poll ads to sell the team, we need to not go to games, but that's just not going to happen. This state loves baseball too much. This state loves the Twins too much to not see them play. And obviously, there are a lot of issues with television deals right now. The Twins did strike a new one now, and it's back on Comcast. I think Xfinity now gets it again. But still, there's still a lot of people with their TV services that can't afford or don't get the Twins with their cable or with whatever service they have. And the only way for them to see them is to go to games. And so we're going to continue to feed the poll ads pockets, and that's what sucks because they know that. They know that this fan base is going to continue to go to games because they're one of the best fan bases in the MLB, and they're just going to continue to take advantage of that. So that's what really sucks about this whole situation. Now, that rant aside, I could talk about that for hours, about how frustrated I am with this ownership group. But let's talk here about what's next, because I do acknowledge the fact that last year I was in this exact same position. Going into the trade deadline, I wanted them to do nothing last year because I didn't think they were capable of making the playoffs. And then after the trade deadline, I was like, okay, let's just see what happens, see if we need to clean house next year. In no way, shape, or form are we going to the playoffs. And I ended up being proven wrong. The Minnesota Twins, obviously the AL Central was horrible last year, and that's the only reason we made the playoffs. But then we continued to, be hot on the pitching side. We won our very first series in the playoffs in 20 plus years. So, I'm coming into this same trade deadline issue with the same amount of pessimism as last year, but I do recognize that we do have the capability to turn things around. And as frustrated as I am with the poll ads, this team could still make some waves in the playoffs, but a lot of things need to happen in order to make that happen. We'll summarize quickly before we make those predictions what our team looks like right now. So what we really didn't think was going to happen was that there would be any improvements made to the offense, because right now the issues with the offense are not necessarily things that I think can be fixed by just plugging in a player. Right now it's hitting with runners in scoring position, getting guys on a consistent track. Every single player has these crazy swings in production. And a couple of the only players this season that have been consistent to any degree are Castro and Miranda, and honestly, probably Correa as well. And other than that, it feels like one player will have this crazy stretch of games while the rest of the team struggles. And that lack of consistency is what has been our issue. But right now, we have Ryan Jeffers and Christian Vasquez in the catcher position. Both of those guys are struggling heavily. Honestly, I would have loved to get a catcher at the trade deadline and DFA Vasquez or something like that, make one of those decisions, but obviously we weren't going to do that. We have Carlos Santana and Jose Miranda kind of platooned at first base, and Miranda can play other positions. We've got Willie Castro, Edward Julian can come up, if the situation forces that to happen. But hopefully we don't see him too often because he was really a letdown this season, and we talk about that more in that trade deadline video that I did with Jake, so make sure you watch that for more information. Carlos Correa at shortstop. We have Trevor Larnach and Margot and really whoever is available in the left field position. That's really been the utility spot so far this season. Byron Buxton, who surprisingly, when he's healthy, he's been performing pretty well. It's just he's also one of those guys that's been incredibly streaky over this season. And then at the DH spot, it's really one of those guys that ends up stepping up. Jose Miranda has played that DH spot a lot this season because Santana's glove is just so good at that first base position. So we've got a lot of good guys here that can hit the ball well. And so that's going to be the first factor for if we can turn the season around. But going now into the pitching, which was really what we thought we needed to shore up here, the rotation on paper, you'd think we wouldn't be too worried about, but it's when you start thinking about injuries, when you start thinking about all these other concerns, because we have Pablo Lopez. In my eyes, I still see him as our ace right now because he is slowly but surely starting to work his way back to what he was last season. He had a really rough first half, but I do feel like he's starting to turn himself around, and anytime he has a bad outing, for some reason, I just still get a good feeling about him and feel like he's going to turn it on when it's time to be clutch and near the end of the season and going into the playoffs if we make it there. Joe Ryan has been much better this season than he was in the second half of last season. He's not giving up those home runs like he was last year. Honestly, so far he's been our best pitcher. I still want to, view Lopez as the ace guy for us and the game one starter right now. But Joe Ryan has been phenomenal. He's had a few clunker games, but other than that, he's been great. And he hasn't been giving up those home runs like last season. Then we've got Bailey Ober, who has shockingly started to develop some consistency. He was one of the more inconsistent guys in the starting rotation, and now all of a sudden he is starting to develop this level of consistency where he's now our third best pitcher. Honestly, he is starting to make a case for being the second best pitcher in our rotation currently, and he is vaulted above the other options for our third guy and the guy that would probably start game 3 in the playoffs, even though he did have a really rough start against the I believe it was against the Astros in the ALDS last year. I feel like he has really grown and matured over these last few months and at the beginning of this season up to now. We did have Chris Paddock. He is hurt. I think he should not be in the starting rotation anymore. I think he has proven time and time again that he is better in short inning spurts and that he would honestly be a great addition to our bullpen if there is a spot for him after he comes back from his injured list stint. And then finally we have Simeon Woods Richardson. Now, Woods Richardson, we talked about him in the trade deadline as well. He was the guy that gave us more and more of a reason to want to add to our starting rotation here at this deadline, because Woods Richardson is in that situation where he is a young, inexperienced rookie, and he's going into a situation where the big moment might not be where he needs to be right now. And it's kind of a tough decision because sometimes he comes in and he puts up these phenomenal starts. I mean, ERA-wise, he's been one of our better pitchers all season long. But the way we saw him pitch against the Mets in that big spot under the lights in New York, it gives you a bad feeling in your stomach. And even when he puts up good starts, you wonder, would he be ready to start a postseason game? And that's the main concern for why we should have added more depth to this rotation, besides the fact that if one of these guys gets hurt, we're done. And if we had added more pitching depth at the trade deadline, we wouldn't have had to worry about that quite as much. We go now into the relief pitching, and we have Jhoan Duran. He hasn't been as strong this season, and it's just kind of a very slow ramp up from the injury he had. I still feel like he is slowly starting to turn it around, and he is our closer, and we have to continue to rely on him. We have Brock Stewart that just came back from injury, and then we have Griffin Jax, Jorge Alcala. Those are all great options. Honestly, Cole Sands has been better and better as the season has gone along. And then again, we have our left-handed options. Oh, I forgot to mention Josh Staumont, who came back from injury and became a really good bullpen option for us. And then we have our left-handed guys, Funderburk, Okert. The fact that Caleb Thielbar is even in our relief pitching core right now is laughable, and that it still really rubs me the wrong way. You can make a case for, we have three great guys, in Lopez, Ryan, and Ober, and Woods Richardson we believe in to carry us, and the inexperience doesn't worry us. You can make that case. There is no reason to make a case for how we didn't need left-handed pitching options. And so that is the biggest hole right now, and I think that's what might kill us down the stretch in the season. And if we do make the playoffs, when we got a guy that doesn't do well against left-handed pitchers and we need to put a guy in, when I see Steven Okert run up, he's not the worst pitcher, but he does not give me confidence in the postseason, and that's the concern. I got two things here. The Twins can make the playoffs if, and the Twins can win the AL Central if. My first one, the Twins can still make the playoffs if, one, we stay healthy, and that is the biggest thing. Royce Lewis, Carlos Correa, Miranda was kind of a freak incident. Miranda doesn't get hurt very often, and now that he's back from his injury stint, he got hit in the head with that pitch, and now he's back again. I don't expect him to be injured consistently, but those are the two main guys, not to mention the fact that I feel like Buxton is due for an injury. We haven't seen him get hurt in quite a while, so I can't help but feel like he's going to go the whole season without getting hurt. He might get hurt here down the stretch. But if those three guys can stay healthy, that's going to be a huge help for us to try and still continue to make a push here for the playoffs. Not to mention the fact that Miranda, Castro, and Lee need to continue their level of production, because going into the season, we certainly were not expecting that level of production from them. They're going to have to continue to overachieve from what we expected this season just for us to stay at the level we were, which is barely even getting us into the playoffs at this point. On top of that, we need to figure out our offense in terms of getting consistent and scoring with runners in scoring position. Those are two things that plagued us last year going into this spot, and we figured it out a little bit going into the postseason, and that's what was able to carry us at least to the late stages of that second round, and that's what's going to have to happen here as well. We really have been struggling with runners in scoring position with those spots. And obviously, some of the injuries are a factor there, but not the only story. Lewis has been back for multiple days now. Miranda is now on his way back, and we have plenty of capable guys that can get hits. We need to find ways to score when you have a bases loaded spot, down one with one out in the 8th inning. You got to make that happen if you're going to want any sort of success in the later stages of the season and potentially going into the postseason. You just have to make that happen. And that's the easiest thing to fix and the hardest thing to fix at the exact same time. That's just something you have to just hope for. And same thing with the injuries. You just have to hope for it. There's no way to remedy any of those issues besides just hoping that it figures itself out and that the clubhouse can survive some of those issues that we've had so far this season. The Twins can win the Central if the Guardians implode, first of all. I mean, on top of that, the Royals need to implode as well. Not necessarily implode, but they need to let their youth kind of get the best of them and start to slow down near the end of the season. Because of the lack of moves we made at the trade deadline, our likelihood of winning the Central is in completely the hands of other teams. We no longer command our destiny in the AL Central. The Royals are now a better team than us on paper because of the additions they made. The Guardians are now a much better team than us on paper based on the decisions and the acquisitions they made. So now it's up to them. If they don't play well, they have an opportunity to give up the AL Central to us. But we are not going to be able to do that on our own, besides maybe being able to completely sweep the Guardians, which I'm not sure will happen. But I just don't have confidence that the Twins have really much of a shot of the AL Central unless the Guardians continue to struggle and unless their acquisitions are unable to help them going down the stretch. So, going into the trade deadline, before I made any predictions of who would make what trade, I had the Twins with a about 35% chance of winning the division, and I had about a 65% chance of them making the playoffs. Now, with what's happened here, and with us not making any kind of acquisition, well, besides Trevor Richards, no offense to Trevor Richards, but it doesn't mean anything. With all of that, I have now our chance of division at 10% after the trade deadline and our chance of playoffs at 40%. So now it's less than half chance for me. My prediction is we will make the playoffs barely as a 6th seed because, the Mariners barely did anything. They traded a guy away and then kind of gained a guy, and I think they got better, but not necessarily a whole lot better. They're still a few games behind us as well. The Red Sox didn't make many acquisitions either, so I'm not necessarily concerned they're going to just leapfrog us. The only way I feel like we are going to miss the playoffs is if we let the fact that this front office doesn't believe in them get the best of them. If the Twins clubhouse starts to become demoralized by the fact that this front office doesn't seem to care if we make the playoffs or not, if we let that get the best of us, then we're not going to make the playoffs. But I do believe in this team to not let that get the best of them, and I want this team to use that as fuel to play harder, to correct some of those mistakes, and to prove that they can win games and that they should invest in this team in the future. So that's what I think will happen. That's what I hope will happen. There's still a very outside chance we win the division, but probably not at this point. We're going to have to sweep the Guardians pretty much the rest of the season. We have some big games coming up against both them and the Royals. Anything can happen. I'm not too optimistic about that, and I'm just kind of hoping that we can still outlast all these other teams for the wild card as well. But let me know in the comments what you think about the Twins' lack of any acquisitions here at the trade deadline. Let me know what you think will happen down the stretch the rest of the season. Comment all your poll ad hate comments down below. I'd love to read all those and kind of pile on top of all those as well. Please like and subscribe, and we'll see you on the flip side.